Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary on Wichita and Kansas government. I'm Bob Weeks. Well, this week, United States Representative Tim Huelskamp of Kansas stopped by the Wichita Liberty studios at KGPT Television. Congressman Huelskamp was born near and raised on the family farm in Fowler, Kansas. He earned a Ph.D. in political science with a specialization in agriculture policy from the American University in Washington, D.C. He was first elected to the Kansas Senate in 1996 and then reelected 3 times. In 2010, when Jerry Moran stepped down to run for the United States Senate, Representative Huelskamp ran for the United States House of Representatives for the 1st District. That's commonly called the Big First District, not because of its population, but because of its large land area. Congressman Huelskamp appears frequently on national news media as an advocate for conservative causes. He and his wife Angela are the parents of 4 adoptive children. Let's watch my interview with Representative Tim Huelskamp. Representative Tim Huelskamp, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. And Merry Christmas to you and your family. We can still say that here.
So. We can. I don't know, it's public airways, Bob. We got to be careful.
That's true. Well, we had last week, there was a pretty big news out of Washington, a budget deal that was forged by Representative Paul Ryan and Senator Patty Murray, passed the House of Representatives, passed a major, the cloture test in the Senate, and will probably pass the Senate and be signed into law by the President. Could you run down the major features or provisions of that bill for us?
A number of things. First of all, I found it very disappointing. I did vote no. Mm-hmm. But what it does is basically blow through the spending caps that were agreed to a couple years ago. And let me back up. Let's say it's July of 2011. Republicans, the majority in Congress, are pushing back against the president's spending and say, hey, we have to do something about the $15 trillion worth of debt.
And this was as we were entering the budget ceiling debate, at least the first one in modern
time. In the debt ceiling. And this has happened numerous times in the past. And usually in the debt ceiling debates, when you actually make some progress on dealing with fiscal problems, in exchange for these caps and this limit on spending, a majority in Congress said, Mr. President, you've got another couple $2 trillion of new debt that you can borrow. And now roll forward 2 years later, and what this bill is does some of the spending caps. It says they're going to spend more money. So what the House and soon the Senate are likely to agree is to raise spending for the next 2 years in exchange for promised cuts in 2022, right after the election. And I could vote for it.
It's hard to do that arithmetic, but I think
that's after it could be after Hillary Clinton's second term.
Yeah.
It's 4 election cycles. So it raises spending now, says we're going to cut spending sometime in the future, and that's why I couldn't vote for an increase in spending.
And that happens a lot in Washington, doesn't it? We're going to increase revenue now, promise that someday in the future we're going to reform ourselves and behave better.
Yeah, not only did it increase spending, it also increased taxes and fees over the next few years. And again, that promise for spending now, cuts later, didn't work for me, and it was opposed by nearly every conservative group in the country.
Yeah, I think that Americans for Prosperity, Freedom Works, Club for Growth, and Heritage Action, I think in particular, you voted against it. Mike Pompeo of the 4th District here in Wichita voted against it. Lynn Jenkins and Kevin Yoder voted for it. So why did they, I guess the Tea Party type of conservative groups opposed it because it increases spending and taxes. Is that the main reason?
It was, and I actually led the opposition to the deal, and a few other folks tailed along, and others did vote yes. But at the end of the day, it does increase spending. And for folks that try to say, hey, Tea Party and conservative folks opposed it, actually, this is the kind of deal that the Republican majority opposed when Pelosi was in office or running the show. At the end of the day, it's more spending, more taxes. We don't take on Obamacare. We lock in spending for Obamacare. But one thing that Washington does a great job is confusing people. This didn't spend a dime. It just set the caps on spending. Between now and January 15th, Congress and the President are going to have to agree to spending on particular items in the future. So that's the omnibus spending bill or the continuing resolution. That still has to be agreed to because some folks in Washington are saying this ends shutdowns. That's not true. So we have more work to do when we return.
I'm glad you brought up that term omnibus spending bill because that's something that I'm not sure I understand myself exactly what that means. Could you tell us about that?
Again, it is confusing. It's meant to be that way. I think the folks in Washington let it that way. The way the budget process is supposed to work, House and Senate agree to caps on spending for a year, and then the appropriations committees go to work and passed 12 different bills for the 12 different areas of that spending is divided in Washington, D.C. Since I've been up there, the Senate has not passed one single appropriations bill that I know of. The House has passed a few, but not all 12. And an omnibus bill means you put all 12 spending bills together, a comprehensive budget, not unlike Obamacare, and you throw that all on the floor, and there's very little opportunity to amend it or make changes to that. So that's probably what they'll do when we return. And again, this was $63 billion more in spending, $63 billion in new spending. I said that's why it was bipartisan. Both sides got more spending, but the American people didn't get what they wanted.
And these omnibus bills, I think they're always hard to vote against sometimes because there's always something for the widows and orphans in there. And if you vote against it, then you're against, American and apple pie and things like that.
Yeah, and that was one of the refrains of the Tea Party movement is break the bills apart. Let's vote on separate things. Sometimes we're not able to pull those things apart, but there's a reason they put it all together. And that's to say, hey, if you want your funding for that project, it's in a bill with a couple $trillion other dollars worth of spending.
And I don't think this method of legislating is peculiar to the United States Congress. This is the way the Kansas legislature works too, isn't it, more or less?
Well, other than it's much, much larger, and it's much, much less transparent. And but again, this was just the budget that sets the caps on spending. But there's nothing to prevent Harry Reid from coming back on January 7th and saying, hey, if you don't give me that additional extended unemployment dollars, I'm going to vote. I'm not going to pass an omnibus. We could still have a shutdown. Whether it's going to happen or not, I don't know. But at the end of the day, we know it guarantees more spending when Republicans said we wanted less spending. So that's why I voted no. And every conservative group was opposed to it. That's why I led the opposition to this bill.
I'm surprised to hear you talk about transparency. I know you've been an advocate for that for a long time. But didn't Barack Obama say this is going to be the most transparent administration ever?
He sure did, and that's not the case with regulations, certainly not the case with Obamacare. The biggest, most expansive grab of government power in perhaps decades, perhaps since 1965 with the beginning of the war on poverty, which apparently is not succeeding very well. We don't know what's going on over there, and the president single-handedly has already suspended 6 portions of Obamacare and says, we're not going to follow that law. And that is outrageous. I think it borders on lawlessness.
Are some of those things going to be challenged in the courts by various groups, do you think, some of these arbitrary?
There will likely be some. I think Congress should challenge that. And what the president said, if you pass a bill that would put in law the fact he suspended the requirements for big businesses. And he said, if you pass that law that would formalize and put in law what I did by executive order, he said, I'll veto that bill. And Congress says, well, okay, I guess we're not going to try to pass it through the Senate. And so that's par for the course. But, when you have a representative government where suddenly the representatives don't matter anymore, that's when people say, is D.C. listening anymore? And frankly, most people do not like what's going on in Washington.
And they really start to lose their sense of legitimacy of government, too. And I noticed that recently, I think Barack Obama has hired John Podesta to come in and be like the czar of executive authority or something like that. So sounds like he even wants to go further down this road.
The czar among czars, I guess.
I guess so it is.
And the president did say after the 2010 election, he said, if Congress won't agree with me, I'm going to go around Congress. But I'll just say, I don't believe this started with President Barack Obama. I think for years, decades, we've had a multitude of Congresses that said, you know what, we'll just let the president do that, particularly in war-making authority and numerous other areas, which to me has put the Constitution on its head, because the preeminent branch is the legislative branch, not the executive, and that's what our founders worried about, and George Washington himself worried about that.
I think the Cato Institute has some good research on that. So you mentioned Obamacare. Let's take a moment off for a commercial break, and when we come back, we will take up that topic of Obamacare. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me in the studio is United States Representative Tim Huelskamp of Kansas. So the law of the land is Obamacare. That's what everybody says, and we're starting to learn what Obamacare really means. I think you think of that after 3 years it passed, 3.5 years ago was when it passed. You'd think that it would be all ready to go, but we've had the problems with the website. But really, a lot of people are saying the website's just the first hurdle to overcome. Once people really start living under Obamacare, which will be in about 2 weeks, I think, January 1st, what's going to happen then?
Well, that's a great question. And President Barack Obama thinks some more advertising, some more publicizing, some more promotion on social media is going to solve the problems. It will not. It's, in my opinion, it's a problem of big government. It's inherent. It's the idea that some folks in Washington can suddenly take over the rest of the healthcare system and fix it. It's not working. And as you mentioned, it's not the website. That's just the beginning problems. The latest step is the fact that millions of Americans lost the health care plan they liked. The president, let's be blunt here, I believe he lied. They knew millions of Americans would lose the health care plan, and I think that's been proven. They knew that. That's why his trust factor is going down. They don't trust this president anymore.
Yeah, the polls are really going down.
But at the end of the day, it's a question: can Barack Obama do a better job of picking your doctor than you can? And I don't think so. I don't think bureaucrats should be in charge of those decisions, and we're going to see more and more problems as we go along. But one thing I do want to correct, because I know you weren't saying that, but in general, the president continues to say this is the law of the land. But again, there's at least 6 portions of the law. The president said, you know what, we're going to ignore my law.
Yeah.
And I know,
like the business mandate.
Business mandate, labor union taxes, go through a long list of things. This issue of grandfathering. He said, well, okay, we're just going to go single-handedly. I'm going to demand every state ignore the law. I'm going to demand they not enforce the law. I had a business in Salina, and on July 1st, they finished their new plan as a business. And then they found out July 2nd that the president announced, you know what, forget that portion of the law. I'm just going to do without it. And the idea, I mean, that's what's inherent to a system. It has to be based on laws, not based on men. But when you have czars or you have the president himself saying we're going to ignore that part of the law, I think that's a real threat to liberty.
And we have, our former governor, Kathleen Sebelius, who just says, well, we'd like these insurance companies, go ahead and let the people stay in the network like their doctor was in the network, and just making up things as we go along like that. It's really kind of distressing, I think. So there was a letter regarding that in the Salina Journal a couple months ago that I'll quote this because I don't agree with what the writer said, but he said, regardless of what people like you, and referring to you, may try to do to hinder all Americans from getting health care, it will happen. So are you and other conservatives that are opposed to Obamacare, are you trying to prevent people from having health care?
Actually, I'm trying to make certain folks like Jeannie in Feldesburg make certain they don't have a 70% increase in their premiums, or stories after stories. Bob, here's what we're hearing. Thousands of Kansans, tens of thousands of them in just my district alone, have lost their health insurance plan that they liked. Their premiums are going up. Their deductibles are going up. It's costing more than they're getting less, all because of Obamacare. And people have health care. The question is health insurance. The question is who's going to control those decisions? And, before Obamacare started, the government controlled about 50% of the health care industry.
Medicare and Medicaid mostly.
Yeah, that's 50%. So what they do with Obamacare is control the other 50%. If you like the way it was going before, then you probably like government controlling even more. But I think it's going to get worse. I think the complaints are going to get greater, and folks are losing more. But it's shocking what's happened to families. It's shocking when you hear about Kathy in just outside of Salina. She had a plan she liked. She had it for 20 years. It covered her husband while he went through and passed away from cancer. She received a letter in May from an insurance company that says, we're canceling your plan because of Obamacare. This company is going out of business because of Obamacare. It's those kind of things that worry me. And, the folks that are most well off, they're the ones most able to live under a system. You just have to look in other socialized medicine systems. It is the folks that are the poorest and are least able, the folks, particularly in rural areas as well. Rural areas already pay higher premiums. They're going to have less choices, less options,
fewer
less
choices
access.
to begin with.
Exactly. And so the people that could least afford it are the ones I fear are going to be hurt the most.
Yeah, and we had, I think, Ezekiel Emanuel the other day saying, yeah, you can keep your doctor if you pay extra for that. And, of course, people have trouble paying for the premiums.
Well, let's note that Barack Obama doesn't live under the system. Joe Biden doesn't. Kathleen Sebelius doesn't.
Harry Reid decided not to have his staff.
What we're developing here in America is what our founders feared, was a separate system for the elites and the political class in Washington and then the rest of us. And with Obamacare, I mean, if you don't like the system, that's too bad. But if you're a federal employee or you're a member of Congress or you're an administration or an appointee, don't worry, you don't have to go through that. Now, I'll back up. Most members of Congress have to go through an exchange, but I think they've created a special exchange outside the law. That's a longer discussion that suggests even members of Congress are on no Obamacare, Bob, but we're on an exchange in Washington, D.C., not the one in Kansas.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And what about the expansion of Medicare I think in Kansas it was almost 200,000 people that might be included, but I think the governor and the legislator are going to decide, no, we're not going to do that. A lot of people view that as cold-hearted, that we have a chance to, at very little cost to Kansas, at least for now, to give a lot of people health care. What's wrong with that argument, or is that line of thought?
Well, as one famed economist said, there's no free lunch. Somebody's going to pay the bill. Right now, what's happening in Washington, D.C. is they're borrowing about 70 cents out of every dollar. And the idea that somehow they're going to pay that 100% down the road, that's what Warren States, I agreed with the decision of the legislature to not expand Medicaid because those federal dollars are not going to come through. But at the end of the day, it was interesting. There was a great study in, I believe, the state of Oregon, which said whether you're receiving Medicaid or receiving nothing, what were the outcomes? It made no difference whether you're receiving Medicaid. So, and that was done by a very reputable research organizations. Those kind of things you get to worry.
That was really shocking to read. I remember I didn't read the whole study, but at least the summary of it, and I was really puzzled about that. And I think another thing, if we did have, and I think this is going to happen anyway, a lot of people after January 1st now have health coverage, and they're going to want all sorts of services. But we still have the same number of doctors and nurses, and matter of fact, maybe even fewer, because I think some doctors have been inspired to maybe retire a year or two early because just to get out of the system at this time. So we're giving people cards that say, yes, you're covered, but that doesn't mean that you can actually get services.
There will be Americans that will show up on January 1st. Again, government's off then. They're going to show up that day. Won't know if they have health insurance. They're going to say, hey, it's my name on the list. And no one will know. I mean, they've already admitted 1/4 of those who have signed up, actually, they've lost the records or the records are incorrect.
Mistakes in the system.
Those came. But you know what we need? We need to go. We need reform in the system. We need to move to a system in which empowers the individual. Doesn't take them out of the equation, but empowers the individual, puts them in charge of their health care. I've signed on to a bill called the American Health Care Reform Act. There are a few others that do some major reforms. We need some changes, but it's not more government. We need more liberty and more control and more personal responsibility to improve the system.
And we've seen a few areas of the healthcare system where government and the existing highly regulated insurance industry really doesn't have much role, such as the LASIK eye surgery and some forms of plastic surgery. And what happens, we find in those services, is that doctors compete for business, and price goes down and quality goes up. Yeah. So if we could just somehow apply that model to more areas of our medical system, I think we might be better off. So,
and it is a difficult transition when you've had decades and decades of government oversight, government control, and little individual liberty. You know, if you really wanted, and I was in a hearing a small business committee, I believe, last week, and an administration spokesman was there talking about the focus in Obamacare is competition. More competition, more competition. I said, well, I thought to myself, what if you want to go to Oklahoma? What if you want to buy an insurance plan? You're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to buy in Kansas. So let's buy across state lines. Let us pick and choose our doctor. That's the next shoe dropping. This being able to pick your doctor is going to be taken away, we believe, by Obamacare.
And I think young people, they don't really see that as a big deal. But once you get to be a certain age, then you kind of have a bond with your doctor. They've been treating you for many years, and they know what's going on, and that's kind of tremendous. So, well, let's take another moment off for a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll finish up our segments with Representative Tim Huelskamp.
You're watching Wichita Liberty TV.
Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me again is Representative Tim Huelskamp of the 1st District of Congress. So we've had, in October, we had a shutdown, a partial shutdown. There's some controversy, I guess, as to what to actually call it of the government. That was over the debt ceiling, and we've got that thing coming, that battle coming up in February or March, sometime along there again. And some people have criticized you and other conservative leaders for causing the shutdown. This same letter writer from the Salina Journal, I hate to pick on him, but he said the foolish direction of Senator Ted Cruz. And I don't know, I kind of like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Mike Lee, I think, are the three of those people that are commonly lumped together. So was the shutdown foolish? Are we just supposed to lie down and just go along with the President and the Senate? Or what should we do on these types of things?
Well, I guess the question is, do you trust President Barack Obama with the entire federal budget? Do you think he should have executive powers that are unlimited? Do you like Obamacare? Do you like a $17.3 trillion debt? And if your answer is to any of those, no, you should say we need to challenge what's going on in Washington. The system is broken. There's no question about it. But when the system's broken, I do not want to put one man in charge, whether it's President Barack Obama or anybody else. So, but what happened in October was a real challenge. Where are we going to go from here? Are we going to continue to borrow and spend and tax? Or are we going to find a way to get our spending under control? I think that was the battle that needed to take place. I actually think because we had the battle, it actually focused on Obamacare, focused on the administration, actually showed that a few Republicans have a little spine and a little fight in them. I think when I hear from Kansans, they're tired of Washington that's out of control, out of touch, that's not listening, and they want somebody to push back and say, you know what, we don't like what's going on. But there are plenty of Republicans that say, you know what, we should just go along, get along till the next election. Well, I'm afraid when you're running $1 trillion deficit every year or $700 billion, we can't wait till the next election until Republicans get in control. Actually, we know what happened last time the Republican establishment was in control. They started running big deficits and run big programs. So we got a long ways to go. But right now, the battle is on for the future of America.
Well, I remember during the run-up to the debt ceiling battle in the summer of 2011, the president and others would say, well, we have to raise the debt ceiling because we have to pay for stuff that we've already bought. And silly me, I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe they'll slow down the spending. But then they make that argument again, and I'm sure that...
dozens and dozens of debates over the debt ceiling. I'll just say, when Washington has made at least some progress towards fiscal responsibility, it's almost always been in the context of a debt ceiling debate. But again, when the Speaker of the U.S. House stands up and says, we're never going to challenge the president on the debt ceiling, I mean, that's like going to negotiation and saying, hey, here's the keys to the car, whatever you want, you get. The president's pretty smart about his negotiations. And actually, Harry Reid is even a better negotiator. And that's what happened during the shutdown. We passed bill after bill after bill to keep the government open. Who was it who voted no or wouldn't let him vote? It was Harry Reid. Harry Reid shut down the government. And Barack Obama likes that, I believe. I think there's political calculation. But will they do that again? I don't know. But at the end of the day, we have to do something about a problem in Washington. It's called too much spending, too much regulation, and too much government. And giving in to the president whenever he wants it, it does not achieve any of those goals.
And I was listening to something on TV today where someone said, well, what should we cut in the government? And they said, well, we should cut the salaries of congressmen and their staff. Well, that would be like maybe, 1/10,000th of 1% of the federal budget or something. Where are the big areas of federal spending that we could start to bend the curve on? I know we maybe can't do it overnight, but at least we can start to bend the curve and move in a better trajectory.
I put together a budget with some of my colleagues, and Senator Paul, Senator Lee, and Senator Cruz, and Senator Rubio did similar things on the Senate side. That would get us to balance, I think, in about 5 to 6 years. That's the quickest we can get. But I tell you, here's the differing views. You have people that, like me, that says we need a balanced budget. It's not only economically important, it's politically important for limited government. But you have the President of the United States, you have the entire Democrat Party, and you have quite a few Republicans. They don't care to ever balance the budget. They think we can borrow money forever. So we put together, basically, what would I cut? About everything, Bob. Everything in the budget can take a haircut. Every business in America, almost everyone, I'll take that back, has been taking cuts. They've been tightening their belt. Every Kansas family's been doing the same. Why can't Washington do some of that? That's what we should demand. That should be a requirement. At the end of the day, the gravy train's going to end sometime. We cannot continue to expect the Federal Reserve to pump funny money in the economy, and we can't continue to have somebody loaning us $700 billion every year to spend and expect our children and grandchildren to pay off that debt.
What's really kind of tragic is, people say, oh, you conservatives are so mean-hearted. But I think I've been watching Arthur Brooks of the American Enterprise Institute quite a bit, and he says, government austerity, in other words, if we really want to run into a problem like some European countries are, when the government really has to cut back, it's poor people who are hurt the most. Well-to-do people have savings or they still have their job. It's really the poor people. So in order to keep up our safety net, we need to start making these reforms now. I think that's the argument that Arthur Brooks
and
makes.
Entitlements that's where the big dollars are. We have a huge influx of folks retiring. And I'll just tell you, if you think there's something in the Social Security system with your name on it, don't believe it. If you think there's a Medicare account with your name on it, no. Every dollar coming on Social Security today is being spent immediately, plus borrowing, and that's going to continue as we age. So it is so critical, which is why we can't sit there and wait another 3 years for entitlement reform. That's why I opposed this deal that Paul Ryan put together, because of what he said. He said we can't wait in the future to reform entitlements because it takes so long. We do not want to wait. till the very last minute and happened in America what happened in Greece, because real people get hurt and get hurt badly when the government fails.
And just as an idea of how difficult it is, I think earlier this year there was a proposal to change the way that Social Security benefits are indexed to inflation. That would slow down the growth a little bit. And the president, I think, signaled that he would be willing to look at that, but there many groups were so opposed to that the idea disappeared. And that was just a little tiny reform and nothing like I think we need to do.
Republicans need to talk about more what they're for rather than what they're against. What's our bold vision? Our vision is limited government, individual liberties, free enterprise, and those traditional values can help undergird our society. That's what we need to be promoting and push. I think we can reach that. I think we can make some progress. But sitting back and just being reactive to President Barack Obama is destined for failure.
Well, we're just about out of time for today. But so my final question would be, in the 3 years that you've been in the United States Congress and several terms in the Kansas Senate beforehand, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of our country?
I'll answer it like a politician would be. It depends. Bob, it depends if I'm in Washington or in Kansas. When I am in Kansas and go to businesses and families and see what's happening here, despite what's going on in Washington, I'm incredibly optimistic. Jobs are still being created. We're still doing great things. We're still creating value. I'm just sitting there going with businesses today that are creating value, changing the marketplace. But when I go back to Washington, I see the class, the establishment, the political class that does not want those type of changes. That's when I lose optimism and hope. That's why I come back every weekend to get a shot of optimism. My home is in Kansas as well. This is where I live. But I think we can change these things. The fundamental issue to me is, what do you believe the character of the American people is? And I think the character still is. They're fiercely independent. They want to do without government. They want to be personally responsible. They want a better life. They want to keep the American dream alive. But I think you have an entire class in Washington that is committed to the status quo, which is the budget they passed last week. More spending, higher taxes, nothing about entitlement reform, continuing Obamacare. And then they were surprised. The Speaker was surprised when every conservative group in the country says, that's not a good deal. But at the end of the day, I think the American people are going to get what they want. They're demanding that, and if Washington doesn't respond, there's some people that will probably lose their jobs.
Well, let's hope so then. Representative Huelskamp, thank you for appearing, and Merry Christmas.
You too. Merry Christmas.